when we first started, the Burnie group was actually Blue Prism's very first partner in North America. 5 years ago, Hugh was, with me, sort of came up with the, didn't come up with the concept, but thought of, we should really pursue this. It's going to help drive change within organizations. As little as 2.5 years ago, we would walk into organizations and say RPA, and the response was, RP what? And now, everyone knows what it is. So it's really hit that adoption curve, and we're well into the thick of RPA. We like to think about automation more broadly, and it really takes shape in 3 different areas. One is around digitization. In order for you to automate, you really need to get data into a digital format. And so too often when you go out into an organization and they say, okay, let's automate the heck out of this, and they've got big stacks of paper. We're like, okay, well first, let's think about how we get that paper into a digital format. And so we do a lot of work around OCR, or even HCR. HCR is human character recognition, where you can get someone to very quickly do data entry into a file, to then go, and the automation, the robot can then take it and put it in the appropriate systems. So, and that can be much faster than someone, as they do today, going and trying to take a bit of information and put it in 5 different systems. So taking paper and digitizing it, using call information, whether that's information from IVR, call logs, or even working on digital capture. And rather than going through a whole process to take paper and use OCR to convert it, we like to think about, are there opportunities to really digitize it? Can we change our website so that rather than people faxing paper to us, can we have this a form? Can we create a form on the web that people can enter, and then we can just immediately go into automation? So that whole digitization area is what we like to think of as a starting point. Then you move into task automation, and this is what robotic process automation, like Blue Prism, desktop automation is more traditional macros, Excel macros, screen scrapers, things like that. And then you've got some of your more traditional tools like BPMS and workflow applications. But the real innovation that the Blue Prism led has been leading for the past few decades is around that central automation. And so how do we take a task or activity and automate it using a central resource or a central robot? And so that's been a really big focus for us, and for I know for many of you around the room for the past few years. And the thing that's really interesting now is once we started down that automation journey, and Dr. Liu will talk about this later this evening, how do you then start to get into smart automation? And so this is where you can really leverage the best of artificial intelligence, the intelligent discovery, natural language processing. We worked with one client where we had emails coming in, and we had someone who would then direct those emails to the appropriate person. With NLP, we can actually have the AI engine read those emails and do that directing. So there's a lot of opportunities around intelligent discovery. And then artificial, and then the machine learning, and then AI are all elements that can be really leverage the RPA and automation in general. So as we talk about automation tonight, intelligent automation is really a concept that we like to think about because it's not the one defined RPA, but rather intelligent automation as a whole. So that's a bit of background about intelligent automation. So let's talk about an automation center of excellence and the way that you might think about setting this up. When we've worked with clients, frequently the journey is one where they start small. They'll start with a process or a process area, and then they see the benefits, and then they start to grow. And I think that's a pretty natural transition for an organization. Soon they get to a point where the automation capabilities are real. Especially in larger organizations, there's not enough for that small team of 3 or 4 people to help everyone. So then things start to splinter off, and in the worst case, you then end up with all these different pockets of automation and everyone's doing it differently. Or you take a thoughtful and planned approach to how you build that center of excellence. We have a lot of experience building center of excellence teams and organizations. And we wanted to share a few things that I think are important from an operating model perspective. First, if you're thinking about a center of excellence, first is around strategy and vision. It's really important to work with the organization to set a strategy for your automation COE. What is it that you want to accomplish? What are the things that where you'll focus, and how are you going to ultimately make decisions? And most importantly, how is it going to feed back into the overall strategy of the organization? We worked with one organization where the first thing that people think about when they think about RPA is how do we release capacity? Well, one organization said actually we think that's interesting, but for us the number one thing that we want to focus on is customer experience. So we will prioritize an automation that helps drive the customer experience over something that releases capacity. In an ideal world, it would do both. But that's a strategic decision that they made, and that was really important for that COE, because as they went about developing and prioritizing, developing their automations, that strategic direction was critical to influencing how they would go about making choices and setting up their COE. Second is organization. How do you organize your COE? And I'll go into it in a little bit of depth in a second, but you can really think about a very centralized model, which has some advantages in terms of standardization and doing things in a very similar way. Or you can be very decentralized. And that has some advantages that from a business perspective, the businesses have a lot of control, but it also means that there's very little standardization. Everyone's going to be doing things differently. So I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. Governance is a very important piece of the COE, so that's where you want to set up the right governance. Do we set up a steering committee? How do we ensure that we're focused on the right activities? How do we train people? What are do we have certification? What do we expect of people? And as we think about objects, as an example, do we have an object library, and how do we make sure that we maintain it effectively? Too frequently, we've seen instances where there is not a good view of how we're going to develop objects, as one example, and you end up with multiple iterations of the same automation. And so this is something that you really want to be thoughtful about when it comes to governance. Pipeline is something that from a strategic planning perspective, you want to think about how are we going to prioritize. And then tool selection is another, which I think our Kelly from Blue Prism will say you always pick Blue Prism. But you do want to think about what is the right tool for your organization, and from a strategic perspective, you want to do the right work and then come up with your choice. And then there are so many advantages to making sure you have that aligned around the organization, and so that's really important. And finally, from strategy, we move into delivery. So in the delivery side, what's our delivery methodology? How do we implement automations? What's our service model? How do we, if there are problems, how do we deal with that? From a people perspective, how do we staff our center of excellence? Do we have people staffed centrally, or do we have it within the business units? And finally, technology delivery. How are we going to set up our infrastructure, and how are we going to execute in an efficient manner? Frequently, we've seen one example where the organization was fully aligned to automation and RPA, but they just couldn't get their infrastructure set up and in place, and so that led to a lot of challenges. So as we think about an operating model for a center of excellence, these are many of the elements which we think are critically important to success. I just wanted to touch on a few of those. One is around organizational structure, and people frequently ask us, how should we set this up? And the answer is, it depends. It depends on the size of your organization. It depends on how standardized your processes are. If you've got an organization which is an amalgamation of acquisitions, maybe all your business units are very different, so it doesn't make sense to have a centralized structure. How can we standardize and make sure we're doing things in a very similar way? So on the one side of the page is the centralized model. This is where everything is very much centralized, all the way from your executive steering committee, your COE management, RPA developers are all central, your controllers are central, your SMEs will still sit within the business because they know the business, but you'll have perhaps dotted line in to the center of excellence. Infrastructure support and technology selection will all be centralized. And so, this model is one where you're going to have very much a standardized approach to doing things. You'll develop a standard way to automate. You'll use similar technologies, similar tools. And so it can be very good from that perspective. The challenge with it is the problem of prioritization and capacity. Frequently when we've seen organizations who adopt a centralized model, the frustration from a business unit is that they can't get enough time or attention from that center of excellence. And as a result, they become frustrated, they deprioritize automation, or in some cases what we've seen is they will actually start their own mini center of excellence. And they'll you find out later that they built it themselves or they're outsourcing it. So it's not really leveraging the best of the organization. On the other side is divisional, and this can be an approach where you have a very different business units. They do things very differently, so there's not necessarily the benefit of sharing objects. But what they do find is there's still some value in having a center of excellence that can look at doing things such as procurement, making sure we're all on the same technology, making sure we have the same infrastructure set up, and some very light touch COE management. So how do we get some best practice sharing across the divisions? So this is an approach that works for some organizations. And there are some benefits to it. If you have some centralized functions, they can make sure you're getting the right tool selection and you're getting the best price, etc. But it still gives those business units some flexibility. The downside of the divisional approach is that everyone's going to be going off and doing their own thing. Frequently, if there isn't good communication, you end up with different technologies. And there's a lot of replication of effort. Everyone's building their own way to train their developers. Everyone's coming up with their own methodology to manage their object library. So the divisional one does have, in the right organization, it can work very well, but you just have to be careful to ensure that you're doing it the right way and you've got some consistency. The one that sort of bridges the two is the federated model. And in this case, many of the developers, controllers, SMEs can sit within the business units, but they actually have more of a tie to a central COE, Center of Excellence. And so it can be, in some cases, dotted line or straight line, but there's really some coordination that's being done by that Center of Excellence. And so that ensures that people are trained in a similar manner, they're developing in the same way, and they're doing things consistently. As well as there's a sharing of best practices that is much more tightly managed than in the divisional model, because the organization is essentially saying to the COE, hey, we want you to really take a stand in making sure that we're doing things consistently, as well as we want you to stay on top of what are our targets, how are we prioritizing, and how are we setting our strategy globally for automation. And so that's where a federated model sort of has some of the best of both worlds, and then you get the benefit of people within the businesses, but you get some of the leadership and direction and consistency of a Center of Excellence who's managing automation overall. So those are three ways that we've seen it. obviously something that I think will be a good topic for conversation at our tables as we have dinner. And then later on, if we want to come back and have some questions about it, we can do that as well. I think I'm approaching my time here, so I just want to touch on a few other topics quickly. Setting up governance best practices. There's many things that a Center of Excellence can do that really help with the automation journey. These include things such as demand management, really helping an organization understand, well, what is it that should be prioritized? Frequently we find that businesses will find small processes which are just painful, and they want to, yeah, just go do that. But the Center of Excellence can say, well, wait a second, we could do that, but really the right answer is to look at this process area and automate that whole process area. And so that's where an RPA, from a governance perspective, can be very helpful, and it can help manage that demand management. It can also generate demand, so it can go out. A lot of people aren't thinking about automation, so it can be tasked with going out to the businesses and finding opportunities. It can be responsible for benefits realization, which is important to track, are we getting the benefit that we wanted to get from automation? Continuous improvement is a key task of a COE to make sure we're always getting better and we're learning what are the new technologies, what can we leverage within our organization. And finally, some other things like training, certification, managing the object library, and standardization. These are all things that, from a governance perspective, the COE can be really helpful with. And so these are all things that, as an organization sets up its Center of Excellence, things to consider and things that the COE can really help with. One final topic that I'll quickly mention is just around the benefit that a Center of Excellence can play in pipeline management. If you don't have people who know how to look at a process with an automation lens, you can frequently come up with answers that are suboptimal. If you have people working with a continuous improvement team or a business process excellence team, they can really help when you're mapping out processes, ensuring that you're highlighting where automation can work. They can analyze the automation applicability, so you understand that in these areas we think that the automation opportunity will be X. They can size and prioritize those initiatives, so you make sure that you're going after the right things in the right time. And then they can also help to build an execution roadmap. And this, I would say, is one area where we do a lot of work with clients because it's really helpful to them, especially clients who aren't as knowledgeable about automation, because we can help paint a picture for their entire organization. Look, here are the pockets where automation is really going to work. Here's the size that you can expect to get. And here's the timing of when we think you can roll this out. So, and that's a role that a Center of Excellence can take on as well. So that's some high-level thoughts and some food for thought as we start to have dinner that you can discuss at your table.
Hello. So my role at Blue Prism is working with some of our strategic accounts and seeing what we can do with RPA that isn't already being done, right? Because you've seen at this point the basics of what RPA can do, how you can set it up in your back office, how you can set it up for HR. You've seen what a COE looks like and how you set that forward. But some of the interesting pieces of RPA that people don't see are the tasks that you never thought to have a human do in the first place because it just wasn't cost effective. Okay? So this brings up the question, what can you do with RPA now that you have really cheap labor? What are those use cases that are new? And this is completely accelerated by 6.4 and the digital exchange, which came out recently, where we have skills and AI capabilities that now become a drag and drop functionality. So I don't need to go through and figure out how to make an API call if I want to do visual recognition or OCR. I can drag and drop, pull it in, done. if I do want to do a custom API, I don't need to be a tech guru. There's a wizard that I just kind of walk through and helps me and sets it up. We're good to go. So now, if we think about what this looks like in the actual digital workers point of view, we market ourselves as a sourcing option. But we need our digital workers to be able to do things like read, look at images, do what people normally can. And now they can do that. So what can we do with that? So recently, within the last, I think it was 2 months ago, I was at one of the largest retailers in the world. And I was talking with them. We gave the whole spiel about how we're a digital workforce, how we have the digital workers that are like human employees and can do the work, and what that means. And they seemed to get it, but we were like, look, what would you do if you had unlimited workers? What's your 10,000 employee problem that you wish you could solve? They said, well, that's easy. If I had unlimited workers, I'd have them watch security cameras. We got into talking, and it turns out they lose 3% to inventory shrink. So specifically, they're losing about $3 billion a year to theft from their warehouses and their back rooms. $3 billion. And they have the security cameras. It's not like they don't have the cameras or anything. They just don't have people to watch them because employees are expensive. And it's not cost effective for them to have people sitting and watching all of those cameras. So I came up with a solution we called Cyclops for them. And what this would do is it would take the security cameras and one worker would take each frame, about 1 frame a second I had it set to, and load those frames into a Blue Prism work queue. Then another process would take those images from the work queue and start analyzing each one. First it would go and look at it and say, is there a person in this image? Visual recognition. If no, we don't need to do anything else, move on. If yes, is anyone supposed to be in here? Well, let me open up our employee database and see who has access to this location at this time. If no one has access, you know there's a problem. If not, you move on. Then you can go and check to see if there's a face, and then you can run facial recognition, compare the face you're seeing from the facial recognition to the employee database and who's supposed to be there, who has access, and start taking appropriate action, going into your ticketing system, taking response to whatever you're seeing happen there. So they were thrilled. It kind of blew up in a good way. And saved them a ton of money. They're working on the pilot now. In fact, it ended up being so successful that we started duplicating this solution out for other industry verticals. And the one I want to show you today is how we use this in healthcare. So specifically for a hospital. Right? So here we're going to look at automating visitor registration and looking at, if there's an issue, being able to take appropriate action for security reasons. Right? So when we see the actual piece, the first thing we want to do is log into our different applications here. So we're going to open up the database now, log in. Let's get this all started up. And once it's started up, we're going to start analyzing visitors. So we're going to go through a couple different scenarios. The first scenario we want to go through is if it's a repeat visitor, someone who's coming in fairly often. So here we have our image. Visitor, we can identify them, and we can start saying like, yes, this is a person we expect to be here, because we're going to run our facial recognition now. Just go through. There's that skill I was telling you about earlier, drag and drop AI capabilities. We put this in here, and we can now figure out exactly who they are and if they're supposed to be there. This is nothing incredibly novel. Microsoft, Google, IBM, they're all going around the world talking about the visual recognition they can do and how they can use it. Where it does get novel is the fact that with this platform, you can start combining them. So one solution we have even uses all three of the big AI vendors and does a comparison, a consensus from them. And if one of them says, if two of them say yes and the other one says maybe, it's going to know to go in and retrain the one that said maybe and process this again. So here we have a second case for an inactive patient. We had fun choosing the the images here. We can do the same thing. We recognize who they are, look them up in the system, and can take appropriate action. Make them their badge as needed. You see the point here. This is not a traditional RPA solution. This is a traditional IT solution. But you can do it with RPA. And you can do it fast with RPA. And that brings us to what I think is the most exciting part of this solution. So, do you remember the original solution I was talking about a little while ago, the warehouse security one? Right. Well, think about that for a second. Again, it's nothing novel, nothing brand new. But I was able to do it quickly by myself. I actually ended up talking to a development team from a very large consulting group. And it turned out they had done almost the exact same solution. They didn't do it for warehouse security. They didn't do it for a hospital. They did it for a factory floor. And having AI and visual recognition, facial recognition, monitor what employees were in what areas of the factory floor for safety concerns and OSHA compliance. But like, pretty much the same solution. We got talking, and they asked me how long it took to build. I was like, how long did it take you to build it? Said it took their team about 6 months to get the pilot, to build it, and now they're doing the pilot. Want to guess how long it took me to build it by myself?
2 weeks.
2 days.
Oh, geez.
2 days. And if that doesn't sell the use case right there, I mean, I don't know what else to tell you, because the speed to value is incredible. So you can take Blue Prism as a platform as you start moving forward and doing things you never thought to do before with RPA, doing things that should be traditionally IT projects, but working with the AI vendors who are all partners of ours to speed this up and get these things out the door lickety-split, so you start seeing a return on your investment right away. So that was most of what I wanted to talk to you about today.